Welcome back to Father's Ed. My name's Paul Rhodes.
And my name's Chris Marchant.
Chris, it has been, for us, a very long time since we actually spoke, apart from like the 5 minute phone call we had about half an hour ago, because you've had a lot going on recently. So we haven't actually spoke properly, I don't think, for over a week, which is probably the longest time we've gone without talking for a couple of years, I think.
Quite proud of that.
So how have you been? What have you been up to?
uh,
Nothing too stressful, I hope.
it's been a crazy one. So we moved. We didn't move particularly far, but we did move over the last weekend, and that has been a labor of love. I'll put it that way. Because we got two young children. So I think my eldest is just coming up to his fourth birthday, and my youngest has just had his second birthday. And actually really different experiences. I just actually took it really well. We'd learned from it took advice a little bit to so we tried to lay out what we were doing, and so he was aware that we were going to move. What the process was, we got a little board and that to kind of show him the journey that we were going to do.
Hmm.
So he actually was relatively surprised, and also both of them came to view. They knew where we were moving to anyway, but his comprehension level is so much more that for him it wasn't quite as much of a shock.
Yeah,
Um,
because actually this is the second time that you've moved in the last couple of years, and obviously the first time around, the youngest one was very young. I mean, literally like months
yeah,
old,
it's three
and
months.
and your eldest was like coming at well, just turned 2, I think.
Yeah, moving with a 2-year-old is actually really hard because they feel everything, but they have no expression. So um, their kind of emotional highs are bigger,
Yeah.
and it's something where it's more difficult to explain to them. So generally, I would actually recommend trying to move with a 2-year-old. Wait if you can.
Yeah,
Um,
whereas actually, I mean, when I moved, so we've been here for 3.5 years now, but when we moved, we only had our son at the time. He was 18 months old, and so he didn't really comprehend anything, so there was no issue with that. So, what was different this time around as opposed to almost 2 years ago when you moved the first time? Both in terms of actually the logistics of it, and then how have they coped in terms of moving in and settling in? You've been in there, what, just over a week now?
yeah, yeah. So good. It's that old classic one, and we've done it with other talks that will come up in the season. Is the importance of routine, but you set up routine. At least for us, we set up our routine based off where we were living. So your bathroom and ones, you've got everything set up in a particular way, and when you move, you've got to redesign that. It's like trying to keep us close as it. So everything still is the run up to bedtime in the order they expect, and that's particularly useful for the younger children. My 2-year-old. Um, to be honest, it was very similar. It's not as far this time, but it was very similar. I think we learned a lot on the planning, but I think the biggest change out of all of it was just that my wife actually was in a much better space, and so we were able to kind of do it with all of our faculties, I think, this time, rather than with such a young child and so close after birth. The biggest difference has just been the ability of us to actually engage with the move. Hopefully that makes sense. But yeah, that has been the biggest difference, having it staged. It was a much more controlled experience in a positive way rather than a negative one.
Yeah, and how are they finding the new place? How have they settled in? Are they sleeping all right?
Might never sleep properly. I always joke, and we've always
So
joked,
so that's
is
not because you've moved. That's just
yeah,
a
that's just
general.
yeah. My two boys have a thing for the last year where if one of them sleeps well, the other one decides they don't want to, and it just reverses between the two. We have no idea why, but they're adorable. Which is not to say, as with all things on sleeping, one is the environment. And my eldest still goes down to sleep very well, but if you're not there, sometimes he just gets a bit worried that because he doesn't know where you are because the rooms are all changed. So he gets that level of little anxiety. So we'll work through that. Um, the our youngest just has got a little bit of separation anxiety moment going as well from it. So there'll be a bit of time and adjustment to go through that, but hopefully it'll stabilize and we'll work on it.
Yeah, we've recently interviewed Dr. Natalie Barnett from Nanit, and so we won't go too far into sleep today because we want to have a proper full-on discussion about all the joys of trying to get your young children to sleep on possibly next week's episode. But no, glad that the move has gone well and that the kids are doing well with it. I suppose it's been a relatively quiet week for us. Nothing too crazy. Last Saturday, we went to the races at Newmarket for the 2000 Guineas Festival, which was excellent. We went with two other sets of a couple of friends, which was really nice. But it also obviously meant that we didn't have the kids for the day. And apart from when we went out for lunch for my wife's birthday last year, actually, this was the first time that we had asked grandparents to have both kids for a full day. So my parents came over at 10 and had the kids until we got back at like 8:30, 8:45 at night. So I think, first time in 5 years almost that we've done that. But it was an amazing day. Please gamble responsibly, but I did come out up quite a bit, which was very nice. And then on Sunday morning, we took my son, who turns 5 in about a month, but we took him into his first junior park run, which was amazing. He's been talking to me about going running for a while since I did a 10K race about a month or so ago. And it's only 2K that they do just around a park, but it was a really nice atmosphere. And he absolutely loved it. So I think that's something that we're going to be doing on a weekly basis now, which is really great. So he's got football on a Saturday, park run on a Sunday now. So nice and active, being outdoors, which is great. And I think what's also great is that since he's seen me starting to run and getting out and about and doing that, it's something that he really wants to do as well. So it just shows you, doesn't it, like how what you do and the activities you undertake, how you can have such an influence on your kids at such a young age without even really trying to. He's seen me going out running and he wants to be like daddy. So now he's going out running, which is hopefully a great foundation in terms of his, health and physical activity moving forward.
It's also something you can do together. And that's the thing, is like creating those shared experiences for however long he likes doing running for. As we all know, kids move through different phases and through different flavors of what they actually enjoy and don't. But for as long as he does, it's something that you can share. I have to admit, my side is starting to look at doing so we did like the rugby tots, which he was always a little bit half and half with, but there's quite a distance actually to go to it. And then, which is a little good because I want to make sure I don't put him off rugby because there's big hopes down there. He's a big kid, but we started doing things like a little bit of climbing together because he's just otherwise it's all the time we're trying to chase him to stop him climbing on furniture and jumping off the said furniture. So I thought you might as well lean into that. And it's something I enjoy, grew up with as well. So it's nice trying to find things that you can do together and share. And it also creates those time slots where we've both got two kids, and once you get two kids, you can't quite do the switch like you do with your first. It's like, oh, I need to take a break for a little bit. Can you take the reins and I'll take 5 minutes and come back? I mean, you can do that, but if you do it with two, your energy drains quicker at a compounded rate. So it's like it's quite nice being able to have things that they enjoy that you enjoy. That's also good if it's beneficial to you health wise. But being able then to have one-on-one time again is actually quite nice. I
Yeah.
definitely highly recommend it as well to anyone.
Before we get into today's interview, then, what's been going on in the news this week? Anything you wanted to bring up? Anything that stood out to you in the parenting space?
I think there are two kind of bits. The kind of first one for me was being a bit of a political nerd. Is I did kind of watch all the local election results, not live. I don't have that in me anymore. I was intrigued with the analysis afterwards, and I was watching like the Laura Krusenberg show, and there was that bit where Kemi Badenoch was mentioning that she doesn't see like immigration, she just sees people having more babies as the future. You're like, an interesting statement for somebody who also is on the record as saying that maternity leave and pay has gone too far and that she doesn't really support the idea of increased maternity leave and pay. So I did find myself yelling at the screen a little bit as to how they're going to square that particular policy circle.
Yeah, I think that's something we should probably get into on another episode at some point because we have got a declining birth rate. We are way below the replacement rate we need to keep up population size. And people will be thinking, why does that necessarily matter? People don't have to have kids if they don't want them, and of course they don't. But there are then consequences in terms of actually how do you pay for an aging population in terms of pensions, care, things like this. So there are some quite serious, economic consequences of an aging, declining population. So yeah, perhaps something we should get into at some point, because actually, I agree that we need to reverse that somehow. But actually, if you're going to tell people they need to be having more children, you need to create the conditions for them to want to have children and for them to be able to afford it as well. And yeah, I think we all know at the moment that it's really, really expensive
Yeah.
to have
It's
kids.
really hard.
And so I can understand why people would think, actually, no, we can't afford to. And also, I mean, we've got two. Like, I love my kids, but I wouldn't want more than two. I couldn't be outnumbered. I think
Well,
it would just be too chaotic.
I was listening to the Diver CEO, which I love as a podcast as well, and they had a fertility expert on a few episodes back now, and I was re-listening to that recently, and she was quite interesting of going, we're not good at family planning. It's something that we don't really talk about, and the fertility element that goes with it. And I'm sure there'll be one where we actually talk to someone in the not too distant future because it is such a big issue. I mean, the sperm count rates have dropped by like half. So it's definitely something that could be talked about more. And hopefully, once people like Dad Shift, which is the other one I was going to raise, is that we got the dad strike that Dad Shift are leading on June the 11th. So it's once there's a movement in the roles and the benefit of better equity between parental, maternal, and paternal leave and pay. I definitely think there's like, the conversation that then needs to maybe pick up after that is talk more about how you plan a family and also what the societal exchange is on that. Like you said, I'm an economist. Is the big one you get with that is if you have a declining population, you have more debt burden being placed onto your children and grandchildren, which will be a higher difficulty to pay off if there's less people it's shared by. So it is really a kids and grandkids issue that I don't think enough of us are aware of.
Yeah. And we'll be having Alex from Dad Shift on the podcast very soon. And we'll probably try and line that episode up for when the dad strike is happening. But let's get to our interview now. Kind of following on a little bit from the Jeremy Davis episode last week on paternity leave, parental leave. This week, we're speaking to Ian Dinwiddy. He's the founder of Inspiring Dads. And he does some amazing work coaching dads, but also working with employers around how they can better support fathers, parents in the workplace. He also does some benchmarking around parental leave for organizations, and we'll put a link to that database in the show notes. It's a really great conversation around what his experiences have been, why he started Inspiring Dads, why he's really passionate about supporting fathers. And also just what can organizations, what can companies do to better support their workforce, especially dads and parents in general?
So Ian's a fascinating one because he brings a wealth of knowledge, but also we often forget that there's three parts really to your parenting journey. There's your own community and personal responsibility. With that, there's the societal elements and the supports that the state provides you. But a lot of us keep forgetting that actually we spend most of our time at work, and that work pays the bills. So there is that relationship also with employers and the role that employers play, and particularly post COVID and the pandemic is what the obligations is probably too strong a word, but what the balance is. You've got a lot of pushback recently about work-life balance, work-life harmony. You've got a lot of talk about what the roles and responsibilities of employers are. So he's a really fascinating one to kind of hear that part of the equation.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a fantastic interview. Let's get to it. So, Ian, you shared openly that you've had three big life moments that have shaped the man and the father you are today. Can you just share with us how those experiences have influenced your perspective on fatherhood?
Yeah, I think everyone kind of goes through life moments that at the time we don't necessarily appreciate how sort of important they are, and sometimes it takes sort of time and distance to kind of put together the pieces and to look back. And it was something that I did a entrepreneurs sort of accelerator course, something called Dent, a man called Daniel Priestley, which I really sort of recommend for anyone who's starting their entrepreneurial journey in terms of understanding sort of why the things that are important to you now in terms of business, but also in terms of personal values. Where do those come from? And so looking back, for me, there are kind of three things. So the first one, when I was about 11 years old, 10, 11 years old, then our mum was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And so it very much changed the way that we operated as a family unit. So my brother and I, quite close in age, my dad and my mum. And mum's multiple sclerosis went downhill quite quickly. There wasn't any of the drugs that are available now, some of the not cures exactly, but some of the ways of mitigating the effects of multiple sclerosis have really come on in terms of what science can do. But at the time, there wasn't a lot that could be done. And so she went from being someone who was very fit and able and very mobile to someone who was in a wheelchair very quickly. And so we became not carers particularly, but certainly for my brother and I, then there were lots of jobs in the home, domestic activity, that Chris and I needed to do, that for the majority of our peer group is something that mums did. Actually, we're talking about sort of mid 1980s now. I think gender equality has moved on, but certainly from that perspective, it was an upheaval in terms of how we needed to do things. And looking back to the sort of the way that my wife Lisa and I, the way that we parent, the way that we share, how we sort of run the family household, I think some of that kind of is much easier for me to sort of take on, because I've seen what equality looks like, seeing what equality can look like, and also in terms of dads taking on sort of hands-on responsibilities in terms of what we describe as second shift or mental load activities. So we had that. Fortunately, my dad worked flexibly, so that made things a lot easier than it would have been for a lot of people. So he had an original car phone, when Car Phone Warehouse was the obvious title for a shop on the high street. He actually had he had one of those plug-in ones that went in behind the gear stick in his company Vauxhall Cavalier, I think, or maybe they upgraded. It went to something else. It was a Vauxhall, started with a C. They always started with C's, the Vauxhalls. So he had a Vauxhall Cavalier with a car phone, and he was able to work really flexibly, which obviously supported mum not being able to do much. And at a time when flexible working wasn't something that was particularly well known, heard of, he would record. He was a chartered surveyor, so he'd record things on his dictaphone, leave the tape with his secretary to type up the notes about the houses he's seen, but also he was flexible enough to get round to, the sports fixtures, or make sure that my brother and I were picked up from school on time, and whatever time that might be. So he had a lot of flexibility there. So I guess that's the first one. Second one, of course, becoming a dad. I don't think anyone can really prepare you for that moment. I think for men, has a lot to do with the first time you hold your baby, you almost suddenly become a dad. It's something that I've talked with a lot of men about. We don't, because we're not carrying the baby, we don't have that lead in quite the same way. We can be prepared in lots of ways in terms of having the right kit and not having too much kit, which I think is a topic of another podcast for you, Paul. So look forward to reading about all the stuff you shouldn't buy. I think that's often as important as the stuff you should buy. But suddenly you're presented with your baby. In my case, C-section was kind of a little bit of an emergency, but in the bigger scheme of things, certainly from people I've spoken to, not so much. And you suddenly become a dad. You have this moment where you're sort of looking into your baby's eyes and you're kind of going, okay, this is real now. And I think it changes everything. And it changes a lot of things for men, regardless of how many times they've done it. So certainly in terms of the work that I do in terms of coaching, is that dads first time round have a particular set of things they're worried about. And then the second time, third time round, that can also be a reset, an opportunity to reflect on what's important to you as a family unit, what's important to you individually. And then the third one, going back to 2012. So I at the time I'd lost touch with my friend Paul Burke, and I came across the really, really sad news that he'd taken his own life. And the story behind that was that he had 3 children, and George, his youngest, had suddenly come down with really, really severe influenza, and was taken to hospital, couldn't be saved. And what was really striking for Paul and for Rian, his wife, was that there was no support around him. There was no support. There was nothing that could be accessed in terms of supporting that family in their moment when they really, really needed help. They needed people to talk to be able to process what happened. They were given a little sort of box of George's clothes, George's possessions he'd come in with, and sort of sent out into the night. And Paul was racked with the guilt that he should have done more as a man, as a dad perhaps, but just as a parent generally. And 5 days later, he took his own life, unable to process just the sheer trauma of what he'd experienced. There was not a lot that they could do to save George, but there was a lot that could have happened that would have supported Paul in that circumstance. And so it's a charity called To Wish that I'm proud to support. I run an annual hockey match where friends of Paul and sort of a broader community from our university friends for the last, I think this will be year 12 this year, year 11. I think it's year 12. This will be the 12th time we play hockey every summer, and we raise money for To Wish, which is the charity that Rian Mannings set up after Paul and George died, to make sure that parents who are in those moments, that there is support there. Because I think sometimes, certainly for men, sometimes we need support to be given and to be presented to us, and not to have to go and search for it, and actually be told, this is what you need to do, this is how you need help. And I was talking to someone just yesterday in terms of prepping for an event that I'm doing, and he'd had a particularly traumatic birth. His daughter had been in NICU for be about 9-10 weeks and had nearly died multiple times. And so he was given a psychiatrist to talk to, which is perhaps something that he reflected that actually maybe he wouldn't have taken on. So the support, having the support there, having the support for men, for dads, it doesn't have to be the most, sometimes we're talking about, we're obviously talking in these 2 cases, sort of the most traumatic events that you could have, but more generally having support. And I think for me, it's really important for men to feel comfortable accessing what's around them, and to be given the opportunity to process, certainly around being a new dad. What does that mean? What does that mean for me as an individual? What does that mean for me in terms of my family unit? And what does the future look like, both at work and at home? I think it's really important. Those 3 elements. And hopefully I've covered all 3 of them. I think I have. I think they're the right ones. They're certainly important ones to me, and they're still important ones to me.
I think you're absolutely right about men seeking help and needing help. Certainly when I've been speaking to children's centres and family hubs about how we can reach dads through our work, one of the things that's come through loud and clear is that they find dads really difficult to engage with, and that actually a lot of dads won't come forward when they need support. So it's about trying to find ways to get that support to them when they need it, when they're not necessarily going to seek it out themselves, which is really important. So tell me about your experience of becoming a dad for the first time. What was that like? What was the transition like from working full time as a management consultant to being a stay-at-home dad?
Yeah, I think no one really prepares you, I think, for the identity shift. And I think that goes for men and women alike. And certainly I think more so for men, that sense of life is relatively straightforward. When there's 2 of you, you prep, you do your hypnobirthing as we did, you meet people through NCT. Hypnobirthing, brilliant. Didn't survive first contact with the enemy. In the case that we didn't really get it, never got the chance to have that sort of beautiful, calm birthing experience that we'd prepped for. And I'd listened to Marie Mongan, I think it was, and we had it on iPod, I guess, at the time. We're going back 15 years. So I became a dad in 2010. And I'd been working as a management consultant, and I'd been working away from home a lot, Monday to Friday. Lisa was working as a lawyer, which is a job she still does, and so her hours were long as well. And with no grandparents around, and not necessarily wanting to use full-time childcare for extended periods of time, we knew we needed to do something different. We needed to kind of think quite carefully about what the first year in particular of parenthood might look like. And due to the nature of Lisa's job, due to the pay inequalities, the gender pay inequalities, certainly in her favour. So she was earning about 30% more than me at the time. She was more interested in her job. Mine could have been done remotely. I could come back to it and freelance, which I did for a while after the kids were born and when I got an opportunity to. We decided that the thing that would make sense for us was that I would have my 2 weeks of statutory paternity leave, which was a little bit of a shock because I thought naively that when you became a dad that it would be a little bit like paid holiday. You'd get paid at full rate, and I didn't realise you didn't until I got paid and realised, hang on, where's my money gone? Why have I been underpaid this month? And it was a little bit of an eye opener in terms of just the kind of structural inequalities that exist within how we support mums and dads. As Lisa received 6 months of fully paid maternity leave, initially I went to 4 days a week at work. And my day at home, I was fortunate enough I was able to flex it around the requirements of the particular role. So it didn't really matter when I took that day. But we built up this kind of 3 days together during the week. And then when Freya was about 6 months old, a little bit over 6 months old, Lisa went back to work when the maternity pay started dropping off a cliff. And we couldn't afford for neither of us to be off. And then we'd planned and structured our lives so that we had a little bit of handover. And then sometime in July 2010, I became a full-time stay-at-home dad, which I did Monday to Friday. It was Freya and I for the next pretty much would have been about 9-10 months. And then when she was 16 months old, she went to nursery a couple of days a week. I started freelancing. First day she was in nursery, I flew to Amsterdam for a client to meet the client, where I did some remote work. And I'm South East London. Used to go from Gatwick early in the morning and go over to the client, who was near Amsterdam Airport, nice and straightforward, kind of good little piece of work. And then I'd come back in time to do nursery pickup after flying back from Amsterdam, which was kind of interesting and exciting all at the same time. But largely I took on the responsibilities Monday to Friday, getting out of the house. Monkey music was a particular favourite of mine. We did swimming classes. I went to a dad's group in southwest London, saw a couple of friends who had children similar age, who were a friend who was a police officer, so he was working sort of shift patterns, so we would hang out together and we'd kind of make the most of the opportunity, but also navigate what is largely a quite female-centric environment around caring for young children. So that in itself, really, really interesting to understand. We see more and more men get the opportunity to be hands-on parents when their children are young in terms of shared parental leave and improved in paternity leave in a lot of companies. But it's still quite a interesting and potentially quite challenging environment to navigate, especially if you're a first-time dad and you've been used to going to work and now you're not. And I think, and that obviously is not, that's gender neutral in many ways, but there are far fewer men in those caregiving environments than there are obviously women.
Quite remarkable that you're able to get to Amsterdam and back in between nursery pickups. I worry about getting back from my day job in Bedford, which is like an hour and a half from where I live. So, amazing that you're able to do it from Amsterdam. Obviously, you had some male friends who were in the same boat as you. Did you go along to any mum and toddler groups? If you did, how was that experience and how were you received there? We've spoken to other guests around their experiences of doing that, and for them it was really tricky to build those relationships because they were seen very much as an outsider.
I think I was quite fortunate, as I very comfortable with female friends generally. I'd worked in environments that were very female dominated, so I worked for a publishing house where I was the only man of 14 in the sales team, for instance. And I was very comfortable with that. I always have been comfortable. I always had sort of good female friends that I felt comfortable talking to, I guess. It's a weird one because I think mums can struggle when they don't have a network that they go to these events. So I was going on my own to, say, Monkey Music is a perfect example. I was a bit cheeky at Monkey Music because I used it as a little bit of a social experiment. So monkey music. Have you ever been to one of these rhyme and time things? You'd have a semicircle of parents and their children sort of sitting on their laps or in front of them, and then you'd have the teacher in front. And it quickly became apparent to me that everyone sat in the same places. They had their own little friendship groups. So what you'd see, yes, as a dad, you were going on your own, so you did need to make an effort to kind of integrate yourself in. But you also see mums that were going on their own who other people wouldn't talk to either because they weren't in the social network. So I think it can be hard to integrate anyway, generally. And I think if you're a man, perhaps it comes a little bit more sort of social judgment. You'd see the occasional dads who'd come along and they were just like, it's all women. And I'm like, yeah, it's all women. It's fine. We're looking after kids. No one really cares as much. I think men think that women care that there's men there more than they actually do.
Yeah.
But what I used to do, and this might hopefully this will make you laugh. It was a bit bizarre, perhaps. I used to move around. I used to sit in a different place each time. So I'd start off. I'd sat in the same place to start with. I was like, everyone sits in the same place. So if I come here a bit early and I sit in a different place, I wonder what will happen. So what happened was that people found that they couldn't sit next to their friend. They'd have to sit and talk to someone new. And so I would kind of deliberately, I don't know whether they ever realised I was doing this, I would sit in a different place quite frequently so I could talk to a different person. Because as the latecomers came in, they had to find a space wherever they were. And because I'd moved everyone around effectively, it all got a bit, it all kind of opened up a little bit, perhaps. So I used to do that. There were dads, certainly there was a dad who was a music teacher and he was at swimming, so that was kind of quite nice. But sometimes I think as men, we underestimate how much commonality we have because we're taking on a caregiving role rather than our gender. I certainly met men who were missing out on social interactions because of their concerns about how that might be perceived. So I talked about going across to southwest London. So I used to go, so we're in Bromley in southeast London. My friend was living in Wimbledon. And so before I saw him on a whatever day it was, I used to go to a Wimbledon Dads Club. It was designed for dads and Litlins, I think it was called. And it was almost exclusively men with their children who were stay-at-home dads in some form or other. Some of them were working flexibly. And it was majority of men. There were some nannies who brought their kids along because their dads went and then the nannies went. And they really enjoyed it because it was a different vibe because it was men. But I met men who outside of those two sessions, they weren't engaging in some of the opportunities. They weren't going along to mums and toddlers group because they were worried about how they'd be perceived. So in the days that they weren't at the dads groups, they were quite isolated or they were missing out on some of the chances just to engage in other people because I think that concern about, certainly it's become sort of more pronounced with the Me Too movement, I think, that concern about the sense that, am I a threat? Do I belong here? It is something that plays on men's minds. But I think it's something that I always encourage, the men that I coach, if we have a coaching opportunity at the right time, is to take those opportunities on and engage and talk to people because actually the commonality within the caregiving experience is the bit that you can you can tap into more than gender, I think.
You talked there about some of the coaching you do. You founded Inspiring Dads. What was it that inspired you to set that up? Was it your own experiences? Was it those of others? And tell us a bit about some of those services that you provide to dads.
Yeah, I think when I started off freelancing, my first freelancing job was obviously the one going to Amsterdam. Four times I went to Amsterdam, didn't miss nursery pickup. There was only so much of that kind of work that it was possible to do. I was really fortunate to work for another company, Europe, who I'd worked for previously to Change Management Group, and they had a job that was in a fruit and veg packing company down in Kent, so not far from where we were. And we were able to work out, actually, there was about 3 days of work that needed to be done in terms of projects. So I did a Monday, Thursday, Friday. But that wasn't sustainable. I couldn't always take things as predates remote work. I think nowadays it would have been much, much easier to find freelance work that didn't involve going to site. But at the time, we're talking about 2011, 12, 13, that kind of time. It was quite challenging. Lisa, my wife Lisa, was on a women's leadership development course in her law firm, and she received coaching. And she said, this coaching that I'm receiving feels a lot like the sort of things you've talked about, the things that you've really enjoyed about the management consultancy piece, which was ultimately about talking to people, understanding what their problems were, and helping them to solve their own problems. I did a lot of process work. I wasn't a big fan of reducing headcount. That was never, a lot of work can be like that, but a lot of it was about process improvement and saying, actually, let's capture what's going well, understand what that is. Let's move on from that. So maybe there's something in it, in terms of coaching. And so I spoke to someone I used to work with who had become a full-time coach, had conversations. It felt like a really good fit for my kind of style of work and what I enjoyed doing in terms of talking to people. And I mean, a lot of coaching, there'll be coaches going, hang on, coaching's not about talking to people, which is absolutely right. It's about asking questions. It's about asking the right questions. And so I trained through the Coaching Academy. It took me a couple of years in between freelancing and doing bits and pieces, and receive my diploma. And then you're there as a new coach. You're there with your shiny diploma and fired up that I'm going to help people and save people's careers or relationships or whatever it might be. You've got all this energy, but then you've actually got to try and make it into a business model that's sustainable. Something for me, it was around being able to be there for the kids. So being able to be a freelancer, to be able to do all the nursery pickup, school and pickups and drop-offs, so that Lisa didn't need to sort of worry about that side of it. When I realized the people I enjoyed supporting the most were the men who were slightly earlier in the dad journey. It was almost a blend between coaching and mentoring and support, and saying, actually, my kids are 5 years old or 6 years old as they were at the time, and yours are 2. I've got this insight, in inverted commas. I can help you. I can ask you the right questions because I know what's sort of coming your way in terms of how you're going to navigate what school looks like, what wraparound care might look like, those kind of things. What I found that it's quite challenging to move men from the pain point to actually taking action, hard to reach, hard to navigate, as you sort of alluded to, Paul, in terms of the sort of sure start sort of environments where professionals are trying to reach dads and trying to support them. Actually, I found that same sort of thing, found it tricky to navigate. And so just before the pandemic hit, which was particularly bad timing, I flipped towards trying to support individuals, men within companies. So as more and more companies offer extended parental leave or shared parental leave, more and more men take time out of the workplace, and they transition into leave for maybe 3-4 months, and they transition back. And so companies are starting to understand that men need support, whether it's in group settings or one-to-one settings, coaching or mentoring support, in the same way that it's been quite common to support women through the maternity transition previously. So there are increasing numbers of opportunities to support dads who are processing that kind of sense of how to be a great dad without sacrificing a great career, which is, for many of the people I'm fortunate enough to work with, I love helping my men to navigate, those two kind of core elements. How do I thrive at work, and how do I be a great dad? Maybe the dad I don't remember growing up. For many men, our parenting role models were very much kind of traditional roles where men pretty much had to provide and had to go out there, and there were single income models. So helping them to navigate a different version of fatherhood, really, really satisfying.
I mean, I took 5 weeks leave when my daughter was born, although the final 3 weeks of those had to be annual leave. And obviously, paternity leave, shared parental leave, if you want to call it that, really, it's shared maternity leave. I did my master's dissertation on this, so it's something I'm really...
Yeah, so, you're the expert.
Well, it was mainly looking at actually how more advanced systems work in Nordic countries and Japan and Spain.
Okay.
But it just strikes me that there are real benefits from having longer periods of leave for dads. And one of the things that you do at Inspiring Dads is work with companies to benchmark their paternity parental leave policies. How are organizations going about that? Are they getting better at it? Is there a willingness there to go above and beyond that statutory leave? And to what extent are companies realizing actually now that supporting dads is the right thing to do for dads and for families, but also does it have benefits for business as well?
Yeah, I'm a big believer that supporting new dads is the route to gender equality, because when you have a point in time where you change the narrative in terms of who is seen as committed in the workplace. So if you're recruiting someone in their, I don't know, say mid-late 20s into your organization, and you've got equally qualified man and woman going for the same job, if you can't tell which of those individuals is most likely to take 6 months of leave when they become a parent, you can't then discriminate against the female candidate because they're the only ones who are going to take the leave. I find it really challenging when you see organizations who massively extend their maternity leave provision, 52 weeks of maternity leave and 2 weeks of fully paid paternity leave. You've got a 50-week gap between individuals. If you've got that split, you won't close your gender pay gap. You'll find that mums are much more likely to take extended leave. Dads don't get the opportunity, and so everything is always framed by if we promote this individual, they might take 50 weeks of leave. If you can't tell who's going to take leave or who might want to take leave, who might want to work flexibly, might want to reduce their hours later on, then you do the cause for gender equality, certainly in terms of women's progression into senior roles. You do it no end of good by equalising that leave. So you do see more and more companies. I think the willingness is interesting because I think there are plenty of firms who will wait until someone else leads, but there are also lots of firms who will go first. So a really good example of going first, Deloitte have moved further and first in that sector. So they've gone to 26 weeks of fully paid parental leave, regardless of how you become a parent. What it does for them is it sets them apart from their peer group. It means that they have a very simple policy. They don't need to have adoption leave because it's all within the parental leave. They don't need to have a secondary carers leave. They don't have women in single-sex relationships taking paternity leave because that's the only mechanism to offer them because they're not a birth mother. They make things simple and they lead. We've got 362 organizations within our database at the moment. So our database allows you to group by size in UK employee size. It allows you by sector. It allows you to sort by shared parental leave offer, paternity leave, maternity leave. I just love seeing companies who are saying 26 weeks, fully paid leave, regardless of how you become a parent, job done. We've got internal coaches supporting these individuals, and we want people to take it. Aviva being probably the standout for the longest period of time who have promoted that and seen massive uplift. Around about 80% of men taking at least 5 months of leave as a result. And it does wonders for how parenthood is seen within an organisation. We don't have mums and dads, we just have parents. But a big part of this, I think, is around improving the statutory provision. So the Labour government have committed to looking at that. Dad Shift being very vocal in terms of stunts and getting that on the sort of front page. If you could equalise statutory paternity with maternity, all the other companies would have to move. Because people would be like, well, we can no longer, well, legally we can't be at this level, but we need to be better than the minimum. I've seen it happen in Switzerland. Switzerland actually offer 2 weeks of fully paid paternity leave for dads, and Switzerland is not a leader, as you will know. Switzerland is not the same as Sweden, certainly. But when they did that, I did some work with Deloitte in Switzerland, and they moved significantly when the law changed. So if you can raise that floor, companies will build off it. But often there is appetite there. It's obviously easier with big companies, which is why one of the things that's really important for me to capture within database was actually how many UK employees have we got. So Netflix and Sony Music, they offer 52 weeks of fully paid parental leave, but they have a relatively small UK footprint. You're talking about 750, maybe 1,000 employees in the UK. So it doesn't affect that many people. It's quite a large PR presence, but actually when you see Tesco at 6 weeks of fully paid maternity leave, Asda have now moved to 4 weeks of fully paid paternity leave. That affects a lot more individuals. And it's all part of this general understanding and movement that actually, the majority of relationships, certainly, in that first year, is that couples are together and sharing the care is good for those individuals, but it's also good for gender equality within those organisations as well, which I think is something that's can never be understated, I think.
Leave would be a massive help. Is there anything else that you think that organisations could be doing to better support dads in the workplace, whether that's around flexibility or something else?
Yeah, I think understanding that regardless of what your policies are, that line managers are often the gatekeepers of how that policy is implemented. So we sometimes talk about the line manager lottery, is that you can have amazing policies, but if you have an individual who doesn't believe that that's acceptable, or tells a male employee, if you take this leave, it will affect your promotion prospects. Understanding that that is the blocker frequently in terms of men doing the things that they might want to do and that the company wants them to do, and training the line managers, hearts and minds, in terms of what's in it for me. Why is it good for men to take leave within my organization? I think that's a really important focus. I sometimes talk about sort of cross-generational gift. A lot of men who, frequently it's men running organizations, they parented in a heterosexual relationship where they were the sole breadwinner, they went out to work, they didn't take leave, that's not what we did, kind of thing. And those men need to be helped to understand that actually they have the opportunity to give a gift to a new generation of men who want to do things differently. And there are starting to be more and more opportunities. So, and then you seek to take away that fear of being uncommitted. So I do events where we'll talk about, can dads have it all? So taking Elliot Ray's Parenting Out Loud movement and talking about that, because it's a concept that people really, really get. We get men involved, so we get dads within the organisation to have a fireside chat, kind of like we're having now. There'll be maybe 3 or 4 of us on a sofa somewhere, and we normalise that conversation about, actually, men do think about this, men do face these pressures, and normalise it for other men. And in some ways, almost putting fatherhood on a pedestal in a way that we don't put motherhood, and that can feel quite uncomfortable, but we need to almost eulogise active and involved fathers in order to make it okay for other men to feel like they can do it too, because that's when we start changing the narrative about motherhood, fatherhood, parenthood becoming more of a sort of gender neutral term. And we start to move the dial in terms of choices for individuals, choices for family units, in terms of how do we divide out our breadwinning responsibilities, our caregiving responsibilities. A generation ago, then it was relatively straightforward. And that provided a lot of comfort for individuals, but actually, and certainty in many ways. But the world's changing quite quickly. To 2018, I think it was, GQ magazine did a State of Man 30th anniversary State of Man report, and they interviewed a lot of men for that magazine piece. And the number one aspect of modern masculinity was being a present father, and that was 2018, I think it came out, pre-pandemic. Men's magazine, not a fatherhood magazine, being a present father. So that desire is there. And sometimes it's about organizations tapping into it, encouraging, supporting them, working with line managers, putting on group coaching, giving, supporting, dads groups within maybe those broader frameworks of family and carers, sort of employee resource groups as well. Really, really important.
Parenting Out Loud is so important. I was on a LinkedIn Live that Elliot hosted probably 2 or 3 months ago now. But I was saying how I have recently just gone on in internal secondment at work. And one of the first things I said to my now line manager when he said, "Oh, you've got the job," I was like, well, something I probably should have said to you before we actually make it official is that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I have to do the school run. And he was like, yeah, that's absolutely fine. And he's got the nursery pickup in his calendar. I've got the school run in my calendar. I'm really lucky that I work with a lot of dads who are the same. We openly talk about our experiences, our responsibilities, our kids. And more often now, you see LinkedIn, other socials, just absolutely full of dads talking about how they are a working a working dad. You know, we
Yeah.
know the phrase working mum has been around for years and years and years, but actually normalizing the term working dad, because I mean, we all are, aren't we? So
Yeah.
really,
Yeah.
really important.
Yeah, no, I remember that. Elliot's I love Elliot's stuff, and I love the concept. It's like, of course, parenting out loud. That just encapsulates what we all want to do. We want to be. We need men to be open and honest about their responsibility, because it normalizes the conversation. It makes it okay, certainly for younger men, maybe lower down the hierarchy, who maybe don't have the same kind of confidence to do that. And if the more conversations that we can have, the more it just becomes, yeah, of course. Yeah. Well, I just need to pop off. I'm just popping off early. Got to do this. Oh, that's fine. Cool. Work will get done. If the work gets done, does it really matter where and how we do it? Sometimes it does, but not all the time.
No, absolutely. So we've kept you for longer than we said we would. So final question, which we ask everyone. We know that there's no manual for parenthood and being a dad, but if you were to write a chapter for a manual, what would your chapter be on?
I think the manual depends. It depends on whether it's aimed particular company. So the chapter for broader sort of societal pieces would be why supporting new dads is the route to gender equality. And I think the chapter for men is, I'm not quite sure what the title would be, but it would be around, I think it's really important to understand what's important to you. So it's being honest with yourself. What are your objectives at work? What are your objectives as a father? Once you're honest with yourself, you can then have a conversation. So I think it would be something like, the title would be something like, the best conversations about fatherhood are the honest ones you have with yourself. So until we're honest about the type of dad we want to be, we can't then start to deliver against that. So I think that's the thing. Important conversations, first with yourself, and then with, if you're in a relationship, it's then with your partner, in terms of seeking to design something that delivers the type of dad you want to be.
Amazing. Ian Dinwiddy, thank you very much for joining us.
It's a pleasure, Paul. Thank you very much for having me on.
And that's our show for today. Father Z is produced by Gemma Lothian, Chris Marchant and Paul Rhodes. It's edited by Paul Rhodes. Our music is by Christos Politis. You can find information, guidance and support on our website, fathercraft.co.uk. That's also where you can sign up to our Father Z platform, read our blog and find product reviews. Please remember to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and leave us a 5-star rating so other dads can find us. It really does help. Thanks for listening.